October 1891, Cheap Mountain Watershed, West Virginia. John R. Proctor drove a federal survey line through the ridge, mapping the slope for accessible coal seams. A recent landslide had split the hillside. It exposed a single route 18 inches across, cutting straight into the sandstone. It did not taper. It did not splinter into feeder veins. It simply ran, unbroken, into the bedrock. Proctor assigned 3 men to trace it. They worked for 3 days with iron picks, carving a trench through packed loam and fractured stone. At 90 feet their blades struck a hollow mass. They cleared the dirt and found a dense, petrified fungal structure. Its cellular architecture matched nothing in the standard botanical references. The crates shipped to Washington and arrived at the National Museum by mid-December. 2 months later, a museum ledger records 2 physicians examining the thin slices under glass lenses, Dr. A. H. Thompson and Dr. J. M. Flint. Their marginalia describe a lignin matrix that defies conventional botany. The fungal filaments had not colonized dead timber. They had infiltrated living bone, preserving the osteocytes while replacing the organic matter. The old mountain families called it sang du sol, blood of the ground. The survey classified it as a parasitic mimic and closed the file. The original field journals transferred to a restricted university vault in 1905. 7 years later, engineers dammed the Cheat River and filled the valley floor with 60 feet of water. The ledgers remained sealed. The specimens sank beneath the reservoir, and for over a century not a single official has asked to see what lies at the bottom. The ledger pages from February 1892 do not speak of decay, they speak of substitution. Under high magnification, the physicians noted that the fungal hyphae had not merely colonized the bone matrix, they had replaced it. Molecule by molecule, the organism had infiltrated the osteon channels, dissolving the original calcium structure and depositing a petrified lattice in its exact place. The cellular architecture remained perfectly intact. The Haversian canals were preserved. This is not parasitic behavior. This is architectural mimicry on a microscopic scale. No mycologist in the 19th century, and none in the modern era, has documented a terrestrial fungus capable of this specific molecular exchange. It behaves less like a scavenger and more like a biological template. The mountain elders knew it by a different rhythm. Ethnographer James Mooney recorded fragments of Shawnee and Monongahela oral history in the 1880s, long before the Forest Service paved the ridge roads. The accounts described a slow maturing fungal mass that could eat the sickness from the bone. The phrasing was precise. It did not claim to cure infection or reduce inflammation. It claimed to rebuild what was shattered. The original survey field journal, archived in a restricted manuscripts room at West Virginia University, preserves the name of the man who guided the excavation, Ezekiel Cottrell. He was a tenant farmer who worked the lower Cheat River bottoms. He told Proctor that his grandfather had harvested the tissue during the winter of 1774. A colonial militiaman had taken a musket ball through the femur at the Battle of Point Pleasant. The grandfather packed the crushed fungal matter into the open tracture. The wound sealed in 3 days. The fractured shaft knitted solid in 14. When Thompson and Flint received the Washington shipment, they did not just examine slides. They tested the hypothesis. The museum veterinary records from early 1892 note 3 rabbits, each with induced fractures in the femur. A powdered suspension of the petrified tissue was applied directly to the break. Control animals required 12 to 16 weeks for complete ossification. The treated subjects showed continuous bone bridging within 10 days. Full weight bearing returned in half the expected span. The data was clear. The results were reproducible. Then the project ended. The official termination memo cites a failure to culture the organism from sterile media. It was deemed a dangerous biological mimic and placed in cold storage. The correspondence hidden behind that bureaucratic language tells a different story. Letters exchanged between Proctor and the museum curator of paleobotany carry marginal annotations that never appeared in the published catalogues. The concern was not the healing rate, it was the source. The geological strata left no ambiguity. The fungal network had consumed osteocytes from a primate lineage that matched modern human morphology. It pulled those cells from sediment that predated the accepted Bering land bridge crossing by at least 10,000 years. If the stratigraphy was correct, the specimen proved a settled human population in the Appalachian Highlands millennia before the ice sheets retreated. You do not rewrite the foundational timeline of a continent for a curious root. You seal it. You file it under mimicry. You let the reservoir rise over it. The West Virginia case did not stand alone. It sat quietly inside a much wider archive of dismissed evidence. 6 years before Proctor cut his trench in Cheat Mountain, a geological surveyor working the limestone bluffs of Tennessee recovered another fungal mass. The collection site lay near what would later be mapped as the Coon Creek fossil beds. The specimen travelled through the same federal channels. It was logged, sectioned, and placed under glass. The examining pathologists reached an identical conclusion. They classified it as a structural mimic. The physical sample vanished in a state warehouse fire in Nashville during the autumn of 1906. Only a secondary inventory catalogue number survives. Look further north to the peninsula of Lake Superior. The autumn of 1878. A University of Michigan field party descended into the copper deposits of Keweenaw. They mapped a root network that ran for over a mile through the ancient bedrock. The petrified strands wrapped themselves around seams of native copper that showed clear thermal working and tool marks made by hands that left no written record. The crates moved east to the Smithsonian Institution. They were never assigned an accession number. They never entered the official collection. Franklin B. Huff, the lead botanist on the expedition, documented the rejection in a private letter dated January 1879. He wrote plainly that the institution held no interest in preserving plant material that appeared to predate the glacial epoch by such a significant margin. The mechanism at work here is not a coordinated scheme. It is institutional inertia operating inside a fragile scientific paradigm. The geological and anthropological frameworks of the 1890s were still being hammered into place. Darwin chronology required validation and careful protection. Research institutions were constructing a rigid timeline of linear progress. A fungus that flourished in a pre-flood world, that shared its ecosystem with an ancient human population, that possessed the regenerative properties recorded in mountain tradition, threatened to collapse that entire architecture. The Cheat River tissue threatened the accepted dates far more than it threatened the public. Inconvenient facts rarely require a lock. They require a classification change and a reservoir. Engineers drafted the proposals for the Cheat River Dam in 1908. The impoundment gates closed 4 years later. The university archives sealed their transfer logs in 1905. Water rushed into the hollows. It covered the survey trenches. It settled over the exact coordinates where the original trench was dug. By the time later researchers requested the original crates for re-examination, the valley floor lay under 60 feet of still, dark water. The ledgers were moved. the physical site was drowned. The pattern holds whenever the ground contradicts the manuscript. The Cheat River specimen does not sit in isolation. It is a single knot pulled from a vast woven silence. From the river valleys of Ohio to the coastal rainforests of the Pacific, the continent holds older botanical memories. Accounts persist of pre-glacial timber reaching scales that defy modern forestry models. Root systems are described in survey logs running thousands of feet below topsoil, anchored to bedrock by architectures we have never replicated. Fungal networks appear in marginal ethnographic notes described as capable of targeted cellular reconstruction, operating on a biological precision that vanished long before the industrial age. These are not campfire tales. They are fragmented echoes of an ecosystem that operated on different principles, one that was systematically pruned from the scientific record before it could be properly studied. The men who filed those ledgers and redirected those crates were not conspirators plotting in dark rooms. They were architects of a fragile consensus. The late 19th century was a period of intense paradigm construction. Geology was standardizing deep time. Anthropology was drafting rigid migration maps. Botany was classifying life into linear ascending categories. A single specimen that demonstrated advanced regenerative tissue replacement, paired with stratigraphy pointing to a deep human presence in the eastern interior, threatened to fracture the entire edifice. You do not dismantle a foundation that has just been poured. The safest path for any academic institution facing contradictory material is to classify it, seal it, and file it away. Protection replaces inquiry. The physical landscape has already absorbed the site. The reservoir sits heavy and quiet over the original trench coordinates. Silt has settled over the root channels, yet the documentation survives. The transfer records rest in a climate-controlled vault at the university. Access requires a signed request and a curator approval. The names remain. The microscope measurements remain. The detailed ink notes describing a mycelial matrix that replaced living bone are preserved on paper that has not breathed fresh air in over a century. The evidence was never destroyed. It was merely filed under a category that guaranteed it would never be looked at again. The silence surrounding these archives is not empty. It is a heavy, deliberate space holding a world that moved in ways we have forgotten. The question is no longer whether the data exists. The data sits in boxes, waiting in dark rooms and submerged riverbeds. The question is what happens to a culture that decides it is safer to lock away its own foundation. What other ecosystems, what other anatomical records, what other chapters of the deep past remain catalogued under the wrong names, preserved in the dark, waiting for someone to finally pull the correct file? The water is cold in the valley. It has been still for over 100 years, and beneath that stillness the old roots wait in perfect stone, holding a timeline the textbooks quietly agreed to forget.